This Sunday, political peril.
I think this was a blessing from God that I caught it. This was a blessing in disguise.
President Trump's poll numbers continue to sink after a disastrous debate performance.
Because nobody will show up.
People with
It's true. Nobody shows up to his rallies.
Growing disdain over his handling of the coronavirus.
It's going to disappear. It is disappearing.
Including the infection of many connected to the White House.
We had a super spreader event in the White House.
And his erratic behavior towards his political enemies.
This was the greatest political crime in the history of our country, and that includes Obama and it includes Biden.
With just 3 weeks to go, how does President Trump change the trajectory of this race? My guests this morning, Democratic Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois and Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. Plus Bill Gates, one-on-one.
We are running the worst testing system in terms of who gets access to it of any country.
On his efforts to make a vaccine available to low and middle income countries around the world. Finally, that plot to kidnap Michigan's governor, Gretchen Whitmer.
Hate groups heard the president's words not as a rebuke, but as a rallying cry, as a call to action.
Does President Trump bear responsibility for encouraging hate groups? Joining me for insight and analysis are NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Hallie Jackson, Hugh Hewitt, host on the Salem Radio Network, Maria Teresa Kumar, President of Voto Latino, and Jake Sherman, Senior Writer for Politico. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history, this is Meet the Press with Chuck Todd.
Good Sunday morning. From his first day in office, Donald Trump has been the shock and awe president. But it's possible with 3 weeks until Election Day that Mr. Trump has lost his ability to shock and awe us. And with his poll numbers slipping, what we've seen in the past week has been especially Trumpian, even for President Trump. He told Americans not to let the coronavirus dominate their lives after he received access to treatments most Americans still can't get. Claimed there's now a cure for COVID in a lengthy appearance on Rush Limbaugh's radio show. Appeared on another show for a so-called virtual medical exam with a friendly Fox doctor in another city. Urged his attorney general to indict Joe Biden and President Obama. Successfully pressured Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to agree to release Hillary Clinton emails. Pulled out of COVID relief talks, then pulled back in. And pulled out of the next debate, then begged back in. Then it was canceled. Are we shocked? Are we awed? Or are we shrugging our shoulders and shaking our heads? The flurry of activity has helped to put the president in political peril. In 5 battleground states, the 538 polling average has Joe Biden at 50% or higher. That includes Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, the 3 states that put Mr. Trump over the top in 2016. And when you look at the other swing states, Biden is leading in every one but Texas. And it's remarkable that we're even talking about Texas, meaning that a 1980-like Reagan landslide is not totally out of the question. Even now, with the president cleared by his doctor to return to campaigning, his sinking poll numbers have made fellow Republicans nervous about their own prospects in November.
I'm feeling great. I don't know about you.
President Trump, trailing in the polls and increasingly erratic, spoke to hundreds at the White House on Saturday, his first public event since being hospitalized.
We're starting very, very big with our rallies.
Still reeling from his faltering debate performance, isolated in the White House, the president spent the week minimizing the virus.
Don't let it dominate you. Don't be afraid of it. I think this was a blessing from God that I caught it.
I'm telling you, we have a cure. More than just a therapeutic, we have a cure.
In a 36-hour conservative media blitz, Mr. Trump spent 2 hours on the phone with Rush Limbaugh.
Started investigating me when I was coming down the escalator, the beautiful golden escalators.
And taped what was billed as an on-camera medical examination with a Fox News medical contributor.
I've been retested, and I know I'm at either the bottom of the scale or free.
On Friday, the president's top infectious disease expert blamed the Rose Garden ceremony 2 weeks ago for the White House outbreak.
We had a super spreader event in the White House, and it was in a situation where people were crowded together and were not wearing masks.
At what point do you think you contracted it, looking back?
You know, I don't know. They had some big events at the White House, and perhaps there.
But this week, the president appeared to blame his infection on Gold Star military families.
They come within an inch of my face sometimes. They want to hug me and they want to kiss me. And they do. And frankly, I'm not telling them to back up.
As his poll numbers drop, the president is searching for a political weapon, publicly pressuring the Justice Department to prosecute Democrats.
Unless Bill Barr indicts these people for crimes, the greatest political crime in the history of our country, then we're going to get little satisfaction unless I win.
And lashing out at Senator Kamala Harris.
This monster that was on stage with Mike Pence.
Senate Republicans, hoping to change the subject, see Supreme Court nomination hearings this week as their only possible lifeline.
I'm going to lead the charge to confirm Judge Amy Barrett to the court.
But Republicans worry the Senate majority is at risk. Senator John Cornyn told the Houston Chronicle this week that Trump let his guard down and got out over his skis by playing down the virus threat. And vulnerable Republicans across the country are now distancing themselves.
No matter who you're voting for president, Susan Collins has never been more important to me.
Are you proud of your support for President Trump?
Well, I'm proud that I'm fighting for Arizonans on things like cutting your taxes.
Senator, the question was, are you proud of your support for President Trump?
I'm proud to be fighting for Arizona every single day.
Is that a yes or a no for President
Trump? Putting legislation on President Trump's desk.
Are you proud of your support for Donald Trump?
I'm proud of the work that we have done together.
And joining me now is Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. He's a member, of course, of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he's author of a new book, One Vote Away: How a Single Supreme Court Seat Can Change History. Senator Cruz, congratulations on the book, and welcome back to Meet the Press, sir.
Chuck, thank you. Good morning. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Let me start with, you've heard a little bit of what the president did over the last week, getting out of talks with Congress and COVID relief, pulling back in, pulling out of the debates, trying to get back in. It's been a whirlwind, perhaps to be charitable. Do you believe the president's behavior is helping the Republican Party right its ship right now?
Well, I will say, first of all, I'm certainly grateful that the president has recovered from COVID. It was a scary several days when you have both the president and first lady diagnosed and sick. The entire country was lifting them up in prayer that they would get healthy. We need a strong president. We need a healthy president. I can tell you in the last week I've spoken to the president twice since he came home from the hospital, and on the phone he sounds strong, he sounds energetic, and I'm grateful that the doctors were able to treat him and that he is getting healthy. That is a very good thing.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
As I was going to say, look, as for the rest, we're less than a month out from Election Day. It's the wild and woolly world of politics now, where both sides are taking shots at each other, and both sides are trying to turn voters out. And I guess we'll get the answer to that on November 3rd.
You seemed to sound the alarm or late last week in an interview with CNBC. You were worried about a complete sweep. What is it specifically that you believe has put you in a situation where you could lose everything, the White House, the Senate, and down the line?
Well, you know, a lot of the headlines out of that interview caught half of what I said. So the point I made is that I think there's an incredible volatility in politics right now. The delta between possible outcomes is as wide as I've ever seen. So I said, look, I think there's a scenario. I believe President Trump can win. In fact, I believe he can have a significant victory and Republicans could take both houses of Congress. But I also think it's possible that we see a Democratic sweep where they win everything and it is a victory of Watergate proportions. And I don't recall an election in my life with the spread, the delta between those two possible outcomes this close to an election being that wide. And Chuck, I think the outcome really turns on two things. Number one, it turns on optimism. If people are optimistic and hopeful about the future, if they're going back to work, that will be a factor in a very good election for Republicans. If they're pessimistic and depressed and hopeless, that will help the Democrats. And number two, turnout. As you know, historically, we have two kinds of election: persuasion elections and turnout elections. Persuasion election, you're fighting over a small band of voters in the middle who are undecided. Turnout elections, both sides are trying to turn out their base. I think this is a turnout election. I think the hard left is showing up no matter what. They hate the president. And the big open question is, does everybody else show up? I hope that they do. I'm working hard to turn everyone else out. If people turn out, it'll be a good election for Republicans. If people stay home, if they're demoralized, that's how we get into a terrible election.
I want to get your reaction to something that the Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, said this week about the way the White House handles the virus. Take a listen.
I can tell you, I haven't been to the White House since August the 6th, and I personally didn't feel that they were approaching the protection from this illness in the same way that I thought was appropriate for the Senate.
Senator Cruz, I know you haven't, I think, been to the White House since the Middle East announcements and those peace agreements with Israel. Do you share the same concern as Senator McConnell when it comes to the White House versus the United States Senate?
Well, look, I think the White House has put serious measures in place to keep people safe. I know for months the standing rule has been that anyone meeting with the president has to get COVID tested that day. So I've had multiple tests when I've gone over to the White House, and every person in the room has been tested. It's frankly the only place you go where every person in the room is tested. As you noted, the last time I went to the White House was for the announcement of the historic Middle East peace deal between Israel and the UAE. That was in the South Lawn. It was outside in chairs, and that was really a piece of history. And so, listen, anytime you do anything right now in this age of pandemic, there is some risk of getting sick. We're fighting this pandemic. We're fighting it hard, but it remains a serious threat. And I think we need to continue battling the virus and doing what we can to keep people safe.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't think we should shut the entire country down, close every small business, destroy people's jobs. And so there's a balance we've got to find, a balance that reflects common sense. I think that's where most Americans are. I know it's where most Texans are.
I want to ask you about these Judiciary Committee hearings, but first the safety of it. Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa, she said that she thinks it's a good idea if everybody did get a test before the confirmation hearings in Judiciary. As she said, look, if we're going to be working in close proximity over long hours, it's probably not a bad idea. Do you think it would be prudent if everybody got tested, considering, look, you're self-quarantining right now because of Mike Lee?
Well, listen, I think all the senators are following the guidance of the attending physician at the Capitol. As for me personally, as you noted, I'm at the tail end of a self-quarantine. I got tested. I came out negative. And I have been spending 2 weeks sitting here in my apartment in D.C., actually frustratingly enough, away from Heidi, away from the girls. But I want to do what is reasonable and beneficial to protect the safety of others. When you look at the hearing, I mean, the Senate has had about 150 hearings that have been either remote or hybrid. At this point in the age of COVID, the Senate's gotten pretty good at this. I think most of the senators are likely to be physically present. Some may participate via virtual interaction with Judge Barrett. And starting tomorrow, I think we're going to have a full and a fair hearing, and it's going to be an opportunity to consider Judge Barrett's qualifications. I hope it doesn't go down the road it went last time. I hope we don't see Senate Democrats turning it into a political circus like they did with Justice Kavanaugh. I hope we don't see the kind of personal smears directed at her family, directed at her faith. If the discussions next week are about her record and her jurisprudence and her fitness to be a judge, great. That's what the Senate should be doing. If it becomes personal attacks, I very much hope the Democrats refrain from doing that.
Just a button. Are you open to having everybody get tested before the hearing begins, though?
I think we should follow the guidance of the Capitol physicians. Look, one of the realities on this question, and it's on every question that comes up, is the instant this vacancy occurred, the instant Justice Ginsburg passed away, Senate Democrats were united in saying, do not fill this vacancy, do not fill this vacancy. And so at every step, they're arguing for whatever will delay things. And their objective is just delay beyond Election Day. I understand why they're doing it.
So you think a call for testing is a delay tactic?
I think they are looking for anything to delay things even a day or two or three. And I think that Senate Republicans will follow the guidance, the medical guidance of the Capitol physician, and we'll go through. We've managed to have hearings for months in a way that has been safe and has protected everyone's safety. We do it socially distanced. We do it following medical guidance, and we'll continue following the medical guidance. But the delay tactics of the Democrats aren't going to work. And I think we're going to see, by the way, some more procedural games and shenanigans. I don't know what they're going to do, whether it's try to boycott meetings or try to impeach the president. But I think they're going to try to do something to delay it. It's not going to work. I believe we have the votes, and I believe Judge Barrett on the merits is going to be confirmed by the end of the month before Election Day.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, thank you for coming on and sharing your perspective with us this morning. I appreciate it.
Chuck, thank you. I appreciate it. And I got to note briefly, the book on the Supreme Court, #1 bestseller in the country on Amazon. So if you want to know.
Well, there you go. Congratulations.
What's happening at the court, it's a good way to do it.
You got it. You got your book plug in. Thank you, Senator. And joining me now on the other side of the aisle is Senate Democratic Whip Dick Durbin of Illinois, who also sits on the Judiciary Committee. Senator Durbin, welcome back to Meet the Press. So I ended with the court with Senator Cruz, so let's start with the court with you. You spoke with Judge Barrett this week. How did your conversation go?
It was a good, constructive, positive conversation. I asked her not some deep legal philosophical questions. We just chatted for a minute, and I really wanted to try to understand her experience as a person when it came to health care, because she is being sent on assignment to the Supreme Court by President Trump, and we know what that assignment is: eliminate the Affordable Care Act, which protects 23 million Americans, and be there if the president needs her on an election contest. How do I know this? Because the president makes no secret of it. He has said it over and over again. So we discussed my experience as a father with a sick child and no health insurance, and we talked about what that meant to families.
Setting aside the issue of the timing of the nomination, did you find that she's qualified for the job?
Well, qualifications are interesting measure. I voted against her the last time because she literally had no trial experience, or very little, when she was seeking this position. In terms of whether she understands the law, of course. She has been a professor, a constitutional law professor at a law school, and that's a pretty clear indication of her background.
What is the Democratic tactics here? And the reason I ask that is you do have some in your party's base that would like to see you guys go after this nomination, fight this nomination hard. You have others who are looking at the election in 3 weeks and think, hey, don't create a situation that somehow disrupts what looks like a current trajectory for the Democrats. What do you say to those at the base who are worried you're not going to fight this nomination hard enough?
Well, I can tell you this. The base is correct in believing that the Republicans have changed the rules 4 years ago. You remember very well, Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans to a person said that the President Obama should not fill the Scalia vacancy, and that, in fact, we should wait until after the election, let the American people decide. Now they have completely reversed themselves. What we are focusing on when it comes to the Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee is a simple fact. 2 Republican senators have said they're not going to participate in this farce. If 2 more join them, then it's game over. We're now at a point where the American people do have the last word on the next Supreme Court justice. And take a look at the composition, the Republican composition of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Let's start with Texas. Senator Cornyn is in a very tight race for re-election. He's also in a state where there are 1.7 million people who will lose their health insurance when Coney Barrett votes to eliminate that program. Another 12 million who have pre-existing conditions. Now you just go down the table there. I should have started with the chairman, Lindsey Graham, in the state of South Carolina. He has 242,000 who will lose their insurance if Coney Barrett eliminates the Affordable Care Act, and 2 million who have pre-existing conditions. Iowa, Joni Ernst, 187,000 will lose their insurance. North Carolina, 500,000 will lose their insurance. So you want to know the point we're going to make? We're making a point that this not only has an impact on the lives of so many innocent Americans, it could impact the members of this committee.
I want to play a quote for you from former Vice President Joe Biden on this issue of expanding the court. Let me play for it and ask you about it on the other side.
They'll know my opinion of court packing when the election is over. Now look, the moment I answer that question, the headline in every one of your papers will be about that. Other than focusing on what's happening now.
Senator Durbin, did the fact that Vice President Biden used the phrase court packing, was that a tell of where the Vice President stands on this, that he doesn't want to see this happen?
Well, I can tell you that we're getting this question. It's a common question being asked because American people have watched the Republicans pack in the court over the last 3.5 years, and they brag about it. They've taken every vacancy and filled it. Did you know that they've sent us, and we have approved only with their votes, I might add, 10 people who have been judged unanimously unqualified by the American Bar Association. Do you know how many judicial nominees came from Obama who were judged unanimously unqualified? None. So we are dealing with people on the court, packed into the court with little or no qualification, who are going to be there for a long time. So it's understandable. The Republicans raised the issue of court packing.
Senator, the lack of answering this question sounds like as if the Democrats are trying to game the results here and just trying to see what happens, and that in some ways it may be that it comes across as a negotiating tool with trying to maybe convince a handful of Senate Republicans to delay these confirmation hearings. Is that what this is? Is this a negotiating ploy?
It is not a negotiating point. We are dealing with the reality. A lifetime appointment to the highest court in the land. McConnell has changed the rules for the Republican senators. We are running this through at a breakneck pace without the investigation that usually comes with these. And those are the issues. And what we're trying to drive home to the American people is this makes a difference in your life as to whether or not you have health insurance, whether or not with a pre-existing condition you can afford health insurance. And we believe that once the Republican voters across this country wake up to the reality of this strategy, many of them are going to say to their senators, listen, this is not what we bargained for. We may be conservative, but we're not crazy. Our family needs health insurance protection. And when I hear Ted Cruz say, well, it really hinges on optimism, I don't know what polls he's looking at, but the ones I look at say 3 out of 4 Americans say this country's moving in the wrong direction. 2 out of 3 say it's going to get worse. And why wouldn't they? With the antics of the president, the super spreader balcony scenes at the White House, dismissing the dangerous nature of this virus, saying that he's had a miracle cure but won't release the results of his testing. Yeah. I mean, it's understandable that people are skeptical of the Republican message and are fearful of what's going to happen if this Supreme Court nominee goes through and threatens their very health insurance. Very quickly, I want to ask you about Cal Cunningham, the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate North Carolina, a state you brought up just now during earlier in the conversation. He's dealing with some allegations of an extramarital affair, some texts that came out. Are you comfortable with the way he's handled this? Do you think he needs to provide further clarification? I haven't followed it that closely other than through the headlines in the Washington papers and Chicago papers. I think he has admitted wrongdoing, apologized for it, and the campaign continues. I don't know the impact on the voters on North Carolina. They make the final judgment. But he's not been evasive when he was brought to light, and he's faced it squarely. I think at this point that's the best he can do. All right, Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois. Thanks for coming on and sharing your perspective with us, sir. I appreciate it. Great. Thanks, Chuck. You got it. When we come back, very few people saw the 1980 Reagan landslide coming before Election night. Could another one be brewing right under our noses? Panelists next. Welcome back. The panel is with us. NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Hallie Jackson. Hugh Hewitt, host on the Salem Radio Network. Maria Teresa Kumar, president of Voto Latino. And Jake Sherman, senior writer for Politico. Look, I want to set up the conversation with Peggy Noonan and what she wrote. It was a very elegant way of trying to write about the current state of politics. No one will talk about it in public because they're not idiots. Journalists don't want to be embarrassed if they've got it wrong. Democrats don't want to encourage complacency. Republicans don't want to demoralize the troops, and the networks have to keep everyone hopped up on the horse race. I will take a small offense to the last part of that comment, but Jake Sherman is this the thing that everybody's whispering about on Capitol Hill and around Washington as far as you're concerned as well these days?
Yes. I mean, if you look across the board, polls out this morning have Donald Trump down by 12 points, have him losing almost every state in the Midwest. I've talked to people in the last couple of days, and I'm going to write this in the next couple of days. Republicans are going to lose seats in the House of Representatives that are at risk of obviously losing their Senate majority. So yes, I mean, absolutely. I think it's undoubtedly true that Republicans at this point, and this clip might become famous if I'm wrong, are in a really tough spot.
Hallie Jackson, how self-aware? Well, trust me. Let me ask it this way: how self-aware of this current situation are the people around the president?
So that's a good question, Chuck, as far as the distinction between the president and then the people around him. And I would say this, there is an acknowledgement that the public polling is not obviously going their way. I still hear things from folks close to the campaign, around the campaign, about how internal polls show them doing better. There is a sense that people who were around the president 4 years ago in 2016 saw the polls maybe not moving their direction then. Obviously, it was a lot different of a landscape in 2016, but there's, from some of these folks, this sort of underdog fighter sense that they have lingering from the last 4 years. I will also say this, Chuck, for the president himself, I think he knows that if there is a way for him to change some of this, right, to change the slide that he seems to be on, it's by getting out. It's by getting out and doing rallies, talking to people, being out there. His coronavirus diagnosis means he has not been able to do that. And I can tell you that based on sources that I've talked to this weekend, he is climbing the walls to be able to get out of the White House compound. He's in this sort of mode, as one person put it, where he's in his, nobody's listening to me, I'm right and everybody else is wrong kind of attitude, where he feels like he wants to be flexing his muscles, getting out, dictating some of these things. The challenge, of course, is that he has a team of people around him who are trying to channel some of that energy, if you will, into a way that could be potentially productive. And there's a real question mark of whether the president is willing to go along with those things or not right now. The bottom line is he's got these rallies set up Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in various key battleground states, Florida, Pennsylvania, for example. To him, that's what's going to make the difference.
Hugh Hewitt, are we in October 1996 territory? Here's Ken Spain, a Republican strategist, who told us on Friday, 6 months ago, Republicans were hoping that we would be talking about Senate races in Colorado, Arizona, and Maine. Instead, there's concern about the potential outcomes in states like South Carolina, Georgia, and Kansas. The point being is, it was about this time in October of 96 when the word went out. It's every Republican for themselves. Don't worry about Bob Dole anymore. How close are Senate Republicans to that mindset?
A week ago, they were very close to that, Chuck, but not. This has been a week of enormous relief. I've interviewed a dozen Republican senators, and the vice presidential debate really turned it around for a lot of Republicans, as did the president's sort of powerful energy on conservative media getting back out there. They're not afraid he's going to be out of the picture, generating base enthusiasm. I remember 96 when Jack Kemp just got completely creamed by Al Gore in the vice presidential debate. Well, this time, Vice President Pence played direct to Pennsylvania on fracking, direct to Pennsylvania on the Supreme Court. So I think across the Senate map, I believe the president is down in double digits, but closing nationally. But across the Senate map, this was a very good week, and that's not even counting the Cal Cunningham collapse in North Carolina.
Maria Teresa Kumar, I will say this. I was surprised at the lack of enthusiasm that I heard from Ted Cruz about the president's political standing.
Well, he said that he's expecting a bloodbath, right? And I think that that's exactly why you have individuals now saying, shoot, we basically gave our Republican Party over to Donald Trump, and he has such an outsized figure. Our destiny is intertwined. You showed a clip of McSally. She couldn't distance herself from the president because she knows that if she denounces him, all of a sudden she is also on his bad list. But the people of Arizona also recognize that she is not the person that is going to get them out of this rut. When you look at the polls and you see that 79% of individuals are fearful for this election, it's not that they're fearful of COVID or healthcare or the environment. They're fearful of the person at the top at the White House making these decisions. This is going to be an election where folks are going to be going out because they're fearful, and they're fearful about their safety. And what Kamala Harris did so brilliantly during the vice presidential debates was that she was talking to suburban white women, saying, your life does not have to be this way. You're right now feeling insecure. Come back to the Democratic Party like you did during the 2018 election. And that's who she needed to win over, and I think she did an excellent job.
You know, Maria Teresa, you actually provided a good segue of a graphic I wanted to put up for everybody here. This issue of who's hopeful and who's fearful. This was fascinating in Pew. Your feelings on the state of the country. And they asked a general question, are you fearful or are you hopeful? What was interesting is while a majority of the country said they're fearful, Biden supporters, Hallie Jackson, were more likely to be fearful. 79% of Biden supporters called themselves fearful. Trump supporters called themselves hopeful, 64%. I will say this, fear motivates. The Trump supporters were more fearful 4 years ago, and that worked.
And you're starting to see that, and I'm struck by something that Senator Cruz said, Chuck, that he's been talking about, which is this idea that if fear does motivate, it's an acknowledgement from the senator that Democrats would likely do better. And it's because of those poll numbers that you're talking about, Chuck. So you're seeing Republicans trying to take that and spin it as Democrats are the ones painting this sort of dark and dystopian message to try to motivate people to come out to the polls. In reality, some of the language and rhetoric that we've heard from President Trump, what he's been running on so far has been this message of law and order, which his supporters appreciate. Critics say, listen, you're talking about trying to scare, for example, suburban women and some of these key voting constituencies with the language that you're using and with the picture that you're painting. So I do think that is something that is going to be critical over the next couple of weeks.
Well, I will say this, the political landscape, if it is a fearful landscape, we know that usually is a greater motivator. I'm going to pause the conversation there. When we come back, how likely is it that we will have a COVID vaccine soon, and who will get it? Coming up, my interview with Bill Gates and his work to get a vaccine available and distributed to people no matter their income all over the world. Welcome back. Despite what President Trump claimed on Friday, there is no cure, nor is there a vaccine for the coronavirus, at least not yet. But when a vaccine becomes available, Bill Gates will be ready. The Gates Foundation has committed some $350 million to support the global response to COVID-19. Much of that money is being spent to purchase and distribute a vaccine to low and middle income countries around the world. And Bill Gates joins me now from Seattle. Mr. Gates, welcome to Meet the Press.
Thank you.
I want to start with those comments from the president about the treatment he received, because these monoclonal antibodies, he has called this cocktail that he got, this experimental cocktail he got, he has called it a cure. Now, this is something you've been talking about, too, as well, and I think the foundation has supported research on this. Could this become the leading therapeutic for the coronavirus as we go forward?
Yeah, the word cure is inappropriate because it won't work for everyone. But yes, of all the therapeutics, this is the most promising. And so we've been working with the companies doing antibodies. We reserved factory capacity all the way back in the spring. And now we're partnered with Eli Lilly, who with Regeneron has been the fastest to get these antibodies ready. They could reduce the death rate quite a bit. So far, we only have dexamethasone, which we funded a UK trial that helped with that. And so adding this to the tools would be a great thing.
What's realistic about getting access to this for hundreds of thousands of people that may need it? Right now, the president is the president, so he's got access to this experimental treatment. How quickly could this be distributed around the country?
Well, very, very few people have had it because it's not approved, and the manufacturing is just ramping up. Now, the pharmaceutical companies are working with each other, sharing capacity, very focused on this. It's a very impressive story, just like on the vaccine side. A little bit, you don't want politicians saying something should be approved because it's wrong to think of political pressure as needing to be appropriate in these cases. I hope the FDA, can take the data, which is looking quite good, and get these out, in the next few months, because we have so little to save lives, and we're going back up to record levels of deaths here in the fall.
Let's move to the vaccine. We know there's a lot of vaccine candidates out there. What is, from where you're perched, where are we on this progress, and when do you expect to see the first one that can be used for, say, elderly and those first responders?
Yeah, it's very impressive how the pharmaceutical industry has diverted resources, gotten involved. The U.S. government, this is one category we've actually done a decent job, has funded the research here. And so I think it's likely by early next year that several of these vaccines will get that emergency use authorization.
I want to end our conversation going back to the pandemic and the overall response. It's interesting. For the first time in its 208-year history, the New England Journal of Medicine took a stance on the U.S. presidential election. They didn't name the president himself. But here's what the editors wrote. The federal government has largely abandoned disease control to the states. Instead of relying on expertise, the administration has turned to uninformed opinion leaders and charlatans who obscure the truth and facilitate the promulgation of outright lies. We should not abet them and enable the deaths of thousands more Americans by allowing them to keep their jobs. Let me ask you this. Can we do a reset in our response, or is it too late?
Well, there are lots of additional deaths coming if we don't get our act together. The fact that the testing results don't come back within 24 hours, we reimburse for these worthless things. We are running the worst testing system in terms of who gets access to it of any country. And so, yes, that's not that hard to fix. You do have to admit that you haven't done a good job and make some straightforward changes. In that case, just the way the reimbursement is done is crazy. Mm-hmm. So there is an ability in terms of leadership that helps with the right behaviors to protect people. We can still do a lot better. Other than funding research, we fall very low in terms of how the quality of our response, which is the opposite of what you would have expected. Right. And so there'll be a lot of work in the postmortem. Why didn't we pay attention to the warnings? Why did we destaff the positions that would have worked in these areas? But just trying to assess blame is not what the focus should be now. The focus should be now is get the diagnostics right. Don't have the say that the FDA is being pressured to do something so that their integrity is clear cut. And then, on the vaccine front, get it to everyone with the right message, including get it to the world so the disease isn't constantly coming back in to our country.
I guess the question do you fear that the mask debate, basically it's been lost? I mean, the state of Florida, the governor there is telling the NFL teams, go ahead and fill your stadiums to capacity. It's okay. There's no mask mandate, no anything. Now, the football teams have decided not to do this, Mr. Gates. But this is the rules there. If this is where we are, does it basically mean that the vaccine is our only hope of getting back to normal?
Yeah, well, society should be able to have things like schooling that get a priority versus certain more entertainment-related things. And I guess, politicians will show what their value system is there. The only way we'll get completely back to normal is by having maybe not the first generation of vaccines, but eventually a vaccine that is super effective and that a lot of the people take, and that we get the disease eliminated on a global basis. That is where we can finally start taking all the problems that have been created in education, mental health, and start to build back in a positive way.
Bill Gates, obviously founder of Microsoft, one of the biggest philanthropists around the world these days. Thanks for coming on and sharing your perspective with us, sir. I appreciate it.
Great to talk to you.
And when we come back, what to watch for on election night? A whole lot more than the White House could wind up changing hands. Stay with us. Welcome back. Data download time. As Joe Biden's lead hits double digits nationally, a lot of Republicans are worrying about what that could mean for them down ballot, and not just in the House and Senate. This year, there are 86 legislative chambers in 44 states that are also on the ballot. And in a census year, Democrats can take away the GOP's huge advantage when it comes to redistricting. So how likely is it that Democrats could flip some of these state legislative chambers? First, let's look at 3 highly competitive states that have been controlled by Republicans for a decade. In all 3, Republicans are in danger of losing their majorities, especially with Joe Biden ahead in the 538 polling average in Michigan and North Carolina, and he's also up by a point now in Iowa. Then there's Texas. Republicans have held the Lone Star State for almost 2 decades. The Texas House was last controlled by Democrats in 2002. Winning it back would be a steep climb. They need to flip 9 seats. But Texas looks like a Trump-Biden swing state now, and that could filter down to the State House. What about Florida? The Florida State Senate was last controlled by Democrats in 1994, last century. Democrats would need a net gain of 4 seats to win it back. Of course, Florida is always neck and neck at the presidential level. Right now, Biden is up by 4 points in the averages. Lastly, Arizona. The last time Democrats had control of the state house there was 1966. But they only need to gain 2 seats for a flip in a state that's clearly trending blue. To be clear, it would take a blue tsunami for Democrats to succeed in all of these states. But with less than a month until Election Day, a lot of signs suggest there may be real potential down-ballot problems for Republicans. And with redistricting on the line, these legislative elections will help determine Congress for the next decade. When we come back, that plot to kidnap Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer and what it says about our politics today.
Hate groups heard the president's words not as a rebuke, but as a rallying cry, as a call to action. When our leaders meet with, encourage, or fraternize with domestic terrorists, they legitimize their actions, and they are complicit. When they stoke and contribute to hate speech, they are complicit.
That was Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer after the news of the arrest of 13 separate individuals charged with either state or federal crimes, basically in a collusion in an attempt that they wanted to kidnap the governor and apparently put her on trial. The president responded to Governor Whitmer's remarks on Twitter, saying Governor Whitmer of Michigan has done a terrible job. Rather than say thank you, she calls me a white supremacist. Governor Whitmer, open up your state, open up your schools, and open up your churches. Maria Teresa Kumar, this was a frightening event, and I'm struck at how partisan the response already is.
Well, you have a president of the United States, when asked on public television during a debate whether or not he would denounce the Proud Boys, a white supremacist organization, he'd not only said that he told them to stand by and stand back. That's not a clear denunciation of white supremacy. When you look at what he was saying and tweeting against the governor back in April because of what she was encouraging the state of Michigan to be safe, these individuals got politicized by his tweets. And they started mobilizing and doing a plot. But this is what was really interesting. When you see why what finally triggered them was the head of the plot decided that he couldn't get into his gym and he was fed up. Talk about incredible privilege of why he was deciding to do this. And this is where the president can't even denounce even there that this was happening. What Governor Whitman did was say thank you to the law enforcement. And when we're headed into this election, Chuck, this is what concerns me. I'm part of a nonpartisan national election crisis task force. In my 20 years of working in politics, we've never had to convene such a thing. Michael Chertoff is part of this task force. Norm Ornstein is part of this task force. And our biggest concern is that will law enforcement have enough support to ensure that during this election season that we're currently in, that they can appropriately thwart these kind of attempts that we're going to see. And the only way that we can ensure that that is true is if the president right now starts denouncing that potential chaos.
Hugh Hewitt, the president's decision to go on the attack on Governor Whitmer and not denounce this terrorist threat against her, big political mistake by him?
No, I don't think so. I think they're terrorists, and I think we've got to be very clear that they don't define political speech in Michigan any more than the people who assault police define the people seeking police reform. They're terrorists. They're McVeigh-level dangerous terrorists, and I'm glad the FBI did their job, but it ought not to put off limits any criticism of the governor's approach to the virus or any praise of the governor's approach to the virus. I think the president's going to play hard, energetic, political mainstream tactics from here until the end. I think he's going to seize on the Supreme Court. I think he's going to seize on court packing not being answered. I wrote about it in the Post this morning, but I don't think he has to respond to every allegation from everyone in every situation.
But Hallie Jackson, here's what it struck me about this. You would assume the president had been told about this in his PDB. This is not something you would keep from the president. The president had to have known about this probably for weeks. And he didn't even, there was no thought of calling her up, no thought of doing something like that. I mean, it seemed a very intentional decision that he wanted no part of this. And then when it got when he didn't like what he heard, he went on the attack.
Well, but Chuck, that's also part of a pattern from what we've seen from the president in instances like this before. Now, you have to remember, he is somebody, and this is what I hear all the time from people around the White House, in the White House, on the campaign, that the president has denounced white supremacy in the past. That is technically accurate. He certainly has done that. At the same time, he has done that when he has come under immense political pressure to do so. It is not something that in the past he has easily volunteered, and that is where critics are especially concerned about the president's rhetoric, his language on this. You have to remember, too, Chuck, that oftentimes the president will say he doesn't know about something until it is sort of the main headline that he's getting pummeled with questions about. And I think, too, what happened recently with the situation of the QAnon conspiracy theory, for example, the Proud Boys, the president sort of says, well, I'm not super clear on what that is, even though the expectation is and the presumption is from people who understand these sorts of national security threats, because Hugh is right, this is terrorism, what happened, that the president would have been briefed about those things, Chuck.
Jake, on Capitol Hill, I just was surprised at where there wasn't sort of more bipartisan concern, more bipartisan sort of calls to, wow, this has gotten out of whack. There seems to be a lot of muted responses, particularly on the right.
Yeah, that's right. Missed opportunity, right? Because the story could have been very easily that this was a terrorist group that had plotted to kidnap and harm the governor of Michigan. Instead, it's a story, a multi-day story here on a Sunday about the lack of response from the president of the United States, not saying, praising the law enforcement and saying it's a horrible thing that's happened, but instead attacking the governor. And on Capitol Hill, there's same kind of tone. So it's an unforced error by Republicans to not just go out and say that immediately and then move on from this awful instance.
Is it the same reason, Jake? They just don't want to get on the wrong side of the president?
I think that's probably right. I think it's just very tribal, right, Chuck? It's a very tribal kind of response.
Nope, and there's certainly, we hear it sometimes a lot on this show. Anyway, thank you all. I really appreciate it. Before we go, I want to let you know about a special Chuck Todd cast that we've got going, Florida, Florida, Florida. It is a 5-part series exploring the 2000 Bush v. Gore recount and why that crisis is still relevant today and could be after November 3rd. The first episode is available right now wherever you get your podcasts, and the subsequent episodes will be released this week. That's all we have for today. Thank you for watching at this early hour. We'll be back next week at our normal time, because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.